volta preparada. E a semente caiu. É, minha gente, ninguém viu. Ara com outra. Arrota, vai lá e vem. Traz tudo. Vai e manda ao fundo. Pobre caiu a linha. Ah, minha gente.
For centuries, the farming season in the lands around Quinta da Alvarinheira began in the springtime. Fields that had lain fallow for 1 or 2 years were now readied for planting. Dozens of workers arrived and began the arduous work of breaking the soil out of its slumber. They came with their oxen, one pair of them being the motor that powered everything in the countryside. One ox may have been strong enough to do the work, but by attaching 2 together with a yoke, it added not only strength, but turned the animals into a team which functioned much better in the farmer's constant battle against the earth. And teamwork is what farming required, from both animals and men. The workers would attach a rudimentary plough to the oxen, and then they began the laborious process of tearing into the soil. One man with a pair of oxen could plough 1 hectare of land in about 35 hours. 4 teams or more could accomplish the same in 1 day. Twice in the springtime these fields needed ploughing, and in between they would be strewn with manure. Finally, it was time to grade and flatten the soil. These steps were timed so as to best combat the weeds, which would constantly overtake the freshly turned and fertilized earth. Finally it was October, and the fields were ready for seeding. The seeds were cast by hands, or by a small device, or sometimes inserted into the soil one at a time, depending on the variety of crop. And the timing of the seeding was critical, since their first water would only come from the seasonal rains, which began around November. The people gathered in a procession, carrying the Virgin Mary from the village church to the edge of the field to be blessed. In the meantime, during the same final months of high summer, other fields where grain had already been growing since the spring were now ready for harvesting. The same teams of workers would come out to cut down the stalks with a short-handed sickle. To be stooped all day was exhausting work. In 1810, a progressive parliament proposed that the scythe be adopted, which would allow workers to remain upright and suffer less exhaustion and wear in the 40-degree heat. However, for reasons of tradition and intransigence, the workers could never be persuaded to give up their short sickles. Now, bundles of wheat from fields all around were gathered and piled into enormous stacks. This was the time for threshing, or beating the grain loose from the stalk. There were several methods to do this, including by running a sled over the wheat, or beating it with articulated sticks. But in the 1880s, a mechanical thresher was invented.